We'll wait for the Zoom to come up and then we will.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I'm good to go. Okay. Evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's Policy and Oversight Board. We've got a really nice item on the agenda that I'm looking forward to in terms of a report on AI. But I do need to do some sort of general business first. Just before I start, housekeeping points. We are being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. So by sitting here and being involved in the meeting, you are consenting to being on YouTube this evening. Could I ask all officers and guests to introduce themselves when I invite you to speak so we know who you all are? Thank you. If the fire alarm sounds, we need to leave the building in an orderly fashion and the staff will guide us to the fire exit, which is on the right behind me. Officers will direct us to the assembly point in Riverside Gardens. Have to do this every meeting, and there have been council meetings when it has actually happened to us, so it is quite an important point. So I will now just go on to the agenda. Have we got any apologies for absence? I think we've got every member of the committee here this evening, so excellent. Thank you, everybody. The next item on the agenda is any declarations of interest. Has anybody got anything to declare in terms of items on the agenda this evening? Nope. Okay. So item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. There's also an action sheet attached to that. So are there any items that people would like to raise in terms of accuracy from the previous minutes first? Any matters arising? Councillor Brockbank-Fowler.
I have some information pending, which I gather is still on its way.
Yes, Councillor Brockbank-Fowler, I did check that earlier and I have chased it up, and I believe the committee clerks chased it up as well. So hopefully we will have that information to you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. So subject to that, are the minutes agreed, please?
Agreed.
Agreed? Lovely. Thank you very much. So our next item is AI, and it's called, the item is labelled Opportunities, Challenges and Risks. So just by way of introduction, I think as councillors we're all conscious that AI is developing very fast. We as a council don't always move quite as fast as digital and the times move with us, so it's quite difficult to keep up. I think the government is struggling as well in terms of keeping on top of this agenda. There's obviously enormous opportunities that we need to harness as a council, but we're also aware that it's quite scary, both probably for us in terms of the journey that we need to embark on as a public body, but also for our residents. But we know that it could bring some really positive benefits to the borough as well. So we're just here on the beginning of our journey this evening in terms of how we think this should look like for Hammersmith and Fulham in terms of those opportunities, and how we should have policies that actually reflect that and protect our residents and does identify some of the risks. So that's the kind of background. I know the government are struggling with some of this as well. I know there's some really good things that have already gone out there in public bodies. So maybe we'll hear a little bit about that this evening. So first of all, I think I would like to welcome all of our guests and invite officers to perhaps set the scene a little bit in terms of where we think we are in terms of in Hammersmith and Fulham at the moment. So it's over to Tina, I think. Evening, Tina.
Evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. So at H&F, we've been looking at generative AI, I think, since probably last summer. We established a working group on generative AI as soon as we realized the implications, I think, for society. And I think the desire to safely leverage the technology, because it's new technology. We don't even know everything that it can't do. And because of the implications for privacy, the potential for bias, we wanted to make sure that we explored it carefully. So we've taken a very, I think, a very measured approach, I'd say. So we started with just learning. So for Tech Week last year, we had speakers from Gartner and also from Microsoft speaking to us about the potential. In the initial days, you couldn't access the technology. So Microsoft were one of the first to release secure technology. So in the initial days, you had to buy 300 license, and we weren't in a position to access that. So in more recent months, we've been able to unlock starter licenses. So from the beginning of this year, we've been exploring with a small number of licenses to understand the technology as Microsoft have released it. So they have products where you can use Copilot with your Office licenses. For example, in Teams, you can record a meeting and then you can have it produce the notes. It does require a human in the loop to actually review the notes and release them. We've also been learning, so attending the Microsoft set up a collaborative forum for local authorities. So we've been attending those events, trying to learn from the early starters. So for example, I think, Buckinghamshire have done a lot of work around Copilot, both for staff and for all their users. We've also been looking at some of the wider technology. So in addition to Copilot, which is accessible via Office, you can also use Copilot via the Azure platform, and you can produce various tools that I think colleagues in Agilicis are going to cover for us. So at the current stage, we're just exploring the technology. We're trying to understand what are the potential use cases. We've been compiling the use cases, and we're also investigating the business cases that other local authorities have developed, because I think the numbers are very promising. But as I said initially, it is new technology, and we really want to understand what the returns are for H&F before we trial it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other officers want to come in now or maybe later? No? Okay, in that case, could I move to Microsoft? Welcome. Jeremy Tolmie and Stelios Saras, would you like to talk to us about what you've been doing with Hammersmith and Fulham, but also maybe with local authorities more generally, and how we should be thinking about AI?
Turn on that. So thank you very much for having us. My name is Jeremy Tolmie. I'm the Microsoft Client Relationship Manager for Hammersmith. We've been working together collaboratively on this journey for some months, as Tina said. The technology is landing in many different ways. There's many different use cases, but above all, we need to think about the responsible use of the technology. So my colleague Stelios, I'll let him introduce himself, will just give us a short presentation of some of the reasons it's here, some of the use cases, and also some of the responsible ways that we need to think about it.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Stelios. I'm a data and AI specialist at Microsoft. And for the last 2.5 years, I'm working with local authorities across the country. So again, thank you for having us, because we will share a point of view with you, but at the same time, we're here to learn from you on how your day-to-day looks like. What are the biggest challenges you want to tackle, and let's see how technology can help us, can help you to benefit the residents. To build on everything that Jeremy said before, we have a very healthy collaboration with Tina and the broader team, because it's not just AI in a silo. We talk about how you can make better use of your data. In general, you are custodians of some really powerful data about your residents. So it's a multifaceted collaboration that we are building over the months. Having said that, oh, brilliant. David, thank you so much. we will spend the next couple of, we will spend the 10 minutes or so trying to level set on AI, because everyone says AI, and I'm pretty sure everyone is understanding something different. So it would be good to kind of level set and make sure that we all understand the same out of the terms. And because I want to share a little bit like a story, a little bit like a point of view, I'm always thinking what the title should be. And I was not super creative, but I titled that Leading in the Era of AI. And I want to be deliberate with every word. You have the opportunity to be leaders in that space. You have the opportunity to be leaders for the benefit of your residents. And then why I say the era of AI, there is a whole reality that is unfolding around us. We have a strong point of view that actually we're going to see a revolution that will be powered by AI, similarly to as we had the Industrial Revolution. I think that as humanity, we're at the very beginning of a completely new era that all of us, we will need to adjust and find our way. So what I will share with you in the next few minutes is how you can lead in the era of AI. And having said that, if we can move to the next slide, please. AI, I think it's useful to share a little bit of history of AI, because AI or artificial intelligence, it's not something new. It's not something that happened last year. I will explain later why we started talking again so intensely about AI, but actually it's been around since 1956. And if we want to feel a little bit of a national pride, it was Alan Turing who said, can we teach the machines to do what humans are doing? And that is artificial intelligence. It took us 41 years to move into the era of machine learning. Machine learning, very simply, what is it is, if I'll show to a model 1 million times, this is a desk, this is a chair, can the model understand next time it will see a chair or a desk? Learn a machine what something is. Only 15 years after, we entered the era of deep learning. What is deep learning? This is where things started getting interesting for the AI, for the data scientists. It's a little bit like human brain, that we have our neural networks into our brain and we learn. Each one of us will learn in a different way. Similarly, scientists were able to replicate a little bit of these neural networks for these models, for these systems. And all of a sudden, this model started processing a very large amount of data, and they started kind of learning on their own. And this is what brought us 9 years after in the era of generative AI. So if it is all of us to start collecting buzz terms a little bit from that session, so generative AI is probably one I would encourage you to feel familiar with. So generative AI is effectively these AI models are able to produce text, images, code, and videos that we have never seen before as humanity. And the reason why we started talking about AI again is up to deep learning, to use AI, you have to be either a coder or a data scientist. In full transparency, I'm none of these. So now generative AI, we have lowered the barrier to entry, and all you need to do to interact with these models is the ability to talk, the ability to communicate in natural language, exactly like I'm talking to you. So when we talk about democratizing AI, that's exactly what we mean. There is not an easier way to interact with technology than with the ability to talk. So that's why, again, we started talking about AI again as humanity. Then if it is to move to the next slide, very, very simply, we talk about AI. What can generative AI do? Effectively, I try to put that in 4 buckets. The first bucket is it can generate content. So as you say to each other, can you give this report to me? Can you write this email to me? Can you respond to this email? The model can do the same. Exactly as you give the order to a colleague of yours to do something, these models can help us and they can assist us and produce text. So whoever is picking up the pen or whoever is typing something on a laptop, we have the strong conviction that we can do that faster, more efficiently by using the assistance of these models. The second capability has to do with summarizations. How many times, especially you, that you fall within public sector, you get expert reports that are 90 pages and to get the essence of it, which might be one page, you need to read all 90 and then try to summarize it. Now, by using, again, the assistance of these models, we can summarize very large documents and get to the essence of what we are after. And we can tailor it. I can say to the model, summarize it in one page or summarize it in 3 sentences and give me a very simple tone. So again, it can help us extract value from very long documents. Third capability for any techies out there, code generation. Working with Tina and the team, you have so many applications as a council, and that you try to integrate all of these applications into a single pool so you can consolidate your data. But sometimes your teams might be lacking a certain skill. So now by using, again, generative AI, we can bridge that skills in terms of coding, because it can translate natural language into coding, or it can autocomplete code, or it can correct code. So it makes all this integration job of the techies much, much faster and easier. And the fourth one has to do with semantic search. Again, you're blessed with a plethora of resources, with big data. And sometimes when you try to find something, how many doors you need to knock and search, and you spend so much of your time. Now you can give, again, a prompt in natural language. I want this, I'm after this. Show me the top 3 reasons why someone is asking social housing on blah, blah, blah. And then it can help you identify the right answer very, very quickly, again, with the power of natural language. So these are the 4 main capabilities of what AI nowadays can do. And if it is to move to the next slide, is, okay, Stelios, you walked us through the 4 main buckets of capabilities, and it has a little bit of a build. So David, feel free to start clicking aggressively. So build the whole slide. If you move to the next one, then we know we overclicked. So, okay, these 4 capabilities that I walked you through before, how does that translate to use cases, to actual applications? Again, 4 buckets. The first one is AI is a promise of productivity. I told you before, you can write faster, you can find information faster, you can write code faster. So AI promises you to be more productive. The second use case is it can automate processes. How many times you find yourselves copy stuff from one spreadsheet to the other, wasting time on literally 0 value added activity. So again, we can use AI to automate processes that it's not a good use of your time, so you can free up time to actually focus on the most meaningful part of your job. The third use case is it can reimagine how you interact with your residents. I intentionally kept the word customer there because your residents are your customers at the end. So how you interact with them. With my council, at the moment when I have a question, even the simplest one, when is my bin collection, I need to phone them if I cannot find the answer on the website, and I will waste someone's time for something that I could self-serve. So by adding these very smart bots on the website, this ChatGPT, if you have played with ChatGPT functionality on your websites, you can enable your residents to find answers in a self-serve manner at the convenience of their place, whenever it's convenient for them to visit your website. So you don't need to also waste a very valuable resource, your contact center, for something simple so they can focus on more complicated questions that the residents might have. And the fourth one is it can help you create content. So as I said before, the technology can translate natural language into images. I can literally put a prompt, create an image of unicorns flying over Hammersmith and Fulham, and it will create that simply images. So it will help you create more engaging content for your residents, something that your residents will find more appealing. So hopefully by that stage, and how I want to finish that slide, sorry, is so let's not obsess with the technology per se, but what, as a technology provider, what we're asking you to do is come to us with your problems. Tell us, I'm not efficient there, or I can be more productive there, or I want to save, I want to find 2 extra hours in my day. How can we do that? And let's start with a business outcome we want to drive, and then we will see which part of the technology can be more beneficial. My last slide is something that Tina touched on and the chairwoman also mentioned before. It's about a responsible ethical use. Of course, it's a powerful technology. Hopefully by now, everyone feels a little bit excited and a little bit hyped by what this technology can do. But I want to change gears a little bit. I don't quote Spider-Man often, but Spider-Man, I think he said, with great power comes great responsibility. 9 years at Microsoft, it's the first year. I actually feel I have very responsibly to sit in front of you and explain what the technology can do. And I want to give you the reassurance that because we're talking about powerful technology, it has been built with responsible AI principles at the core. So a responsible use of AI, it's not something that came to us as an afterthought, but it's part of the design process. All of these models have been built in a human-centric design. And if I can mention some of the principles, because I think it's useful for the conversation. The first one has to do with privacy and security. Every AI model, in order to be useful, it requires data. So we want to give you the reassurance that as you put data through this model, the data is your data. Neither us as Microsoft or anyone else has access to your data, or we use the data to train these models. Your data is your data. The other principle I want to touch on is has to do with fairness. These models were built to treat everyone the same, so they don't have any embedded biases. However, if your data is biased, AI models don't correct the biases in your model. So again, credits to Tina and the broader H&F team that we work with is they have this data quality thing top of mind as we advance the maturity of the council. Third one has to do with transparency. As I said before, we talk about AI and people would think from robots taking over the planet to I don't know what's happening in everyone's brain. But what transparency means for us is we want to level set and we want everyone to be able to explain, to understand, first of all, how these models were trained and to explain how these models come to a recommendation. Other principle has to do with inclusiveness, and that's close to my heart. There are 1.7 billion people with disabilities on this planet. We can use AI as a force to create more inclusive environments, more inclusive cities, more inclusive working environments. So if you can imagine what technology like translating speech to text or text to speech can do for someone who is blind or deaf or has mobility issues. So we can use this technology to actually include people that they have felt marginalized for years. And the last principle, and I always intentionally finish with that, has to do with accountability. Tina mentioned that before, human in the loop. You will not hear me ever, and hopefully none of my colleagues ever saying these models can replace humans. These models are to assist humans. These models are there to help us become more efficient. They are not there to take decisions on their own. So there should always be a human who would be responsible for what the end action is. They're there as assistants, and that's why Tina mentioned a couple of times the word co-pilot. At the beginning, I was like, what a weird name for Microsoft to name products after Copilot. But then we're like, yeah, because they're there as a Copilot, still the human is the pilot. So by no means think of this technology as a way to replace some of your colleagues, or if someone is lazy, oh, I'll use ChatGPT to summarize it. No, you're all responsible for the outcomes as you are now. Just these technologies can help you be more efficient and more effective. So that was the point of view that I had to share on behalf of my organization. Hopefully, as I said, that excited you about the future that unfolds around us. We haven't solved all the issues that we have as humanity, so we should encourage technology to be our assistants and see how we can provide better service for our residents. Yeah, happy for any questions, happy for any points of discussion.
Thank you very much for that. I think you touched on an awful lot of the questions that have been running around in my head. So I'm sure a lot of the committee have got questions as well. We've got some other guests, which I'll just invite to make some comments before the sort of committee starts asking all of these questions that they've got. So first of all, could I introduce Agilicis, who I believe have been our sort of partner support IT people for a very long time. So where are Agilicis on this, and how are you working with the council on it at the moment?
Sorry, introduce myself. So Eugene O'Driscoll, I'm the account director of Agilicis for Hammersmith and Fulham. Over the past 12 months, we've been working closely with Tina and the team, showing the path of AI and what Agilis is doing with our other partners. And I'll pass over to Darius.
Thank you very much. I'm Darius Tuma. I lead Agilisys Products, which is the Agilisys business unit, which is focused on generative AI product building. We've been working with Hammersmith and Fulham and various other councils in recent months to co-develop and explore Gen AI opportunities. We've been looking at a range of different use cases, from things like personal productivity all the way through to handling of quite complex processes and applications. The way that we view this is very much based around sort of 4 key foundations, the way we look at this. Most important from our perspective is the role of the organization as a foundation. That comes with 2 lenses. One is the learning and development culture that's required with AI and generative AI more broadly now. This is a new skill sets that requires new teaching and new learning, and we're a big part of our support is helping with that. And then secondly, comes with the culture that's needed to innovate and continuously improve and learn. With this technology, it's really, really important, and that's a big part of what we do with local councils as well. I think the other things that we focus on at Agilisys and with our products that we're building, strong data governance and infrastructure is really important as well. We look at that as a big enabler, but not necessarily a restrictor as it once was with AI. AI has previously been very difficult and challenging to unlock that sort of golden box of data, especially in the public sector context. Generative AI, through some of the points that Stelios mentioned with the sort of semantic search capabilities, means that we can use much more unstructured data than we ever have been able to before. For the public sector, that offers a huge array of opportunities that we're particularly excited by. The ability to connect these data sets and data points in what's known as corpuses of information now unlocks a huge array of opportunities for a council, whether it means predictive analytics solutions for looked after children, or actually just understanding what personal activity like taking out your bins on a certain day or by a certain deadline might mean for a citizen's behaviors with a council in a later life. These are all really important data points that generative AI tools can now use and leverage for various products, which are particularly exciting by. So that data infrastructure piece is a really important element that we've been working on with councils with as well. And I think finally, the other thing that we like to talk about is just having that sort of, talked about from an innovation perspective and a cultural perspective, but the governance around this is really important, not necessarily to restrict innovation and restrict the rollout of these technologies, but actually to enable decision-making and continuous learning and improvement as well. So that's how we've been working with the likes of Hammersmith and Fulham and other councils in recent months.
Thank you. Could I now go to our guest that we've got online, who's Professor Aldo Faisal from Imperial College. Aldo, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you very well, and thank you very much.
Would you like to, we work very closely with Imperial College on a whole number of things in Hammersmith and Fulham. So we're very pleased you were able to come this evening, even though it was online. And we would be very interested to hear what Imperial College can bring to this debate, because I know obviously Imperial are very much embedded in the healthcare sector, where AI is probably a bit ahead of what local authorities do. So your perspective is very welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to make the introductions complete, so I'm a professor at Imperial College. I'm also the incoming director of the Alan Turing Institute, which is the national institute responsible for AI. And I've been leading over the past 15 years major AI initiatives in AI for healthcare, working specifically a lot with data that was donated by the citizens of also your borough in Northwest London. And we've also developed a number of solutions that have been helping citizens. So based on these lessons, we're trying to scale some of these things up to the national level. So we're very aware of what AI can do and how data can save lives. When I'm speaking now, I have to make clear that I'm speaking on behalf of myself, with my private view. I cannot speak on behalf of Imperial College, but I'm very happy to share you my views. I think what we're seeing is a revolution, and many people have pled many times about revolutions, but I think what generative AI, specifically large language models, but also other models can do, is they can transform white-collar work very substantially in a way that robots have never been able to transform blue-collar work. And I think, especially at the level of local government, this gives us tremendous opportunities. And that's for multiple reasons. Local government contains a lot of data, and there are a lot of local governments. So from an AI perspective, that's typically the scale of data that we require. It's very hard to learn from, for example, national government decision things, because there are not that many decisions made, but a lot of local governments make a lot of decisions. And what we require for generative AI is a lot of data. So that gives us an opportunity to really help you more than maybe at higher levels of organization. I think the other interesting aspect about local government is that you're also dealing with problems that are, so to speak, very much driven by directly observable data, be that traffic, be that pollution, be that other factors that you need to factor in when you're designing or improving your services. And that gives us an opportunity to really do something here. I think also when we're talking about generative AI, we need to talk about risks. Aside from the aspects about privacy of citizens, there's also, of course, the risk of using systems like ChatGPT to manipulate public opinion, creating fake news, fake images, but also, on the other hand, being a lot more effective at messaging, at running, say, campaigns for re-election that you can do at a much lower cost than if you would have to go through an advertisement agency. I think also because of these risks and opportunities for government and political and democratic systems, local government will benefit a lot of that, simply ultimately because it's the councillors that know their constituents and the constituents know their councillors. So, fake news will have much harder purchase and spreading about you than, say, an MP who is much more removed from their constituents. And I think that's an opportunity and a shift that we believe we're going to see, that the more you have automatically or AI-generated news and news stories, that the human-human connection is going to gain in value. And that puts local government at the center of that, because that's the actual people who know their people. I'll stop here and be happy to take more questions.
Thank you. Okay, I'm now going to ask the committee if they'd like to ask questions. Councillor Rowbottom got my eye first.
Thank you so much, and superb panel, and Professor Faisal, thank you for joining us online as well. Absolutely kind of brilliant. I'm very supportive of this agenda, but I do have some questions. Firstly, around practically whether there's a kind of working group and what the timeline is for the ambition to kind of implement this. And secondly, Stelios, I was looking at your use cases, and of course there are many processes inside, the council as an organisation to streamline, but notably on your kind of 4 cohorts, it didn't kind of describe the very complex cases that we deal with. The main spend or complexity is in adult social care or children's, basically. And I'm sure this has been discussed, and perhaps this is like a first wave of implementation. So I wondered if and when that might be brought in. And the second is the interoperability of data, or kind of collective commissioning, whatever we want to call it. I see a number of councils on Loti's website. I wondered actually if this is our golden moment to do genuine kind of co-commissioning with the NHS or with central government or other data sets beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with where we are with the working group. So as I mentioned, we started with a small trial at the beginning of this year. So we've got about 20 licenses that we're testing, mainly in digital services, just to understand the potential of the Microsoft Copilot product. We've also been exploring the market, so looking at products such as those produced by Agilicis, which they might demo today, I'm not sure, but where you can create almost templated tools that produce consistent content, like a report, to a particular format and standard. So where we are now, Microsoft has a free tool, which is Copilot for Edge, which is a secure version of ChatGPT. And we're in the process of rolling that out to all our staff. And the idea is that we'll use that to familiarize all our users with the technology and give that to them as part of a package of support. Our working group is also a forum where we've been engaging with various colleagues, so housing specifically, contact centers, the REAP program. So they've been part of the journey with us, looking at the technology. And I think in terms of the use cases that have specifically shown ROI, we know that contact centers have actually demonstrated ROI. We are also interested in the potential to use them to help us with housing, so processing possibly housing complaints. But we will still follow the standard H&F process, which is put together a business case. And once we've put together a business case, seek funding. Once that's approved, then we'll start with, small trial and potentially scaling up. But that's where we are within the council.
Councillor Rowbottom, do you want to come back on that?
That's the first question, is that, so you've said the greatest ROI is for internal processes, and I have no doubt that there's means efficiency in this. I don't know whether it would be more or less complex with the data implications actually, but I would just ask that perhaps, I can't imagine that it would have a low ROI or low impact if we were to look at the complex cases as well. So I wasn't quite sure of the rationale.
Hello, sorry. I think it depends on how complex the case is. So, I would say if it was to do with social care, what are the inputs? What's the data? How good is the quality of the data? So I think that's where you have to consider the complexity. And I think if it's resident facing, we also have to be more careful. So we've started very, very small with our standard governance. So we look at business case by business case. We use our existing processes such as the data privacy impact assessment. We assess our suppliers to make sure they're secure. But I think when you start to look at the more complex cases, then we will need to look at putting in place more governance around that. And we're looking to colleagues across the sector, such as the London Office of Technology and Innovation, to see the models there for how you actually manage and assess cases like that before you actually deploy them to the public.
Just to come back, I think I was anticipating that you'd say it was part of a second tranche, but I would just ask that our focus is on there, and I'm sure we could be as set out as the ambition at the beginning leaders, particularly with expertise we have in the borough and with Imperial as well. And the second question I asked around commissioning and whether this could be our moment for genuine kind of integration of services across departments that are usually quite siloed. Has that been embedded into the programme?
Hello, sorry, I keep on not, excuse me. So we don't have an active program specifically looking at AI in health and social care. What we have is sort of a forum where we can engage with existing programs. And if there's a program of work that wants to explore that, then we will support them with that exercise.
Promise, this is the last one from me. So I would welcome views as well from other people who we have in the room, IRL and virtual. But is there an explicit way to kind of get involved? How are areas of priorities fed through to this programme?
So the working group is actually quite informal. The process that we have is you bring a business case. So for example, with the REAP program, they have a program of work. It's got its own tranches. It's got its own program of work. But if they want to deploy AI, they have to come to the working group and present their business case. And then we will either approve it or, not, suggest amendments for how they might deploy it. But it's still in the very early stages. So for example, at REAP, they've only just started looking at contact centers. And I would say those are very early conversations. We'll need to develop the program, flesh it out, and then look at how we deploy the technology.
Yeah, can I just come in here as well? I think the point you raise about silos is a hugely important one, actually. I think one of them...
Councillor Reid, could you introduce who you are?
Sorry, Councillor Rowan, Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform. I think the point about silos is a hugely important one. And frankly, I think one of the biggest impacts that technology can have on improving the way that we deliver services in local government is through getting rid of these silos between departments that you get in councils, but you get frankly in all large organisations. The REAP program that Tina mentioned is something that we've put in place to try and combat that. This is the Resident Experience and Access program. So it's not necessarily just using AI, but it's using it's looking at the way that we manage data and the way that we use that. And so it's a bit of a wider program to just the generative AI subject that we're discussing tonight. But I think that's a really good example actually of how the council is using technology and is at the forefront of technology to make sure that we're delivering services in the best possible way.
Darius, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just wanted to jump in on that social care point and that potential opportunity there. Generative AI absolutely has use cases for social care. There are certain use cases which require much more governance and consideration before deploying, of course. But if we think about what generative AI is really good at and some of the use cases we've already described here, productivity, things like meeting minutes and business administration is a very clean use case that goes beyond committee meetings and board minutes and stuff like that. Actually, all the safeguarding meetings and all the other types of meetings around the social care process required structured meeting minutes, require a huge amount of business administration across a council that generative AI could be used for. Also, the opportunity to improve accessibility, a point that Stelios touched upon, but there's so much that is done with social care documentation and other things like that, which are sent to third parties or translated or changed or configured in a certain way for those with special needs, for example. Generative AI has a massive use case for that type of opportunity as well. Things that aren't necessarily considered that high risk necessarily, and much more sort of low-hanging fruit use cases. But I think the major opportunity as we see it for social care is around the new era of generative AI chatbots. So, chatbots with generative AI are no longer these sort of bottom right-hand screen rule-based technologies, which, try and put you in try and sort of point you in a certain direction if you give a certain answer. These are chatbots which have contextual understanding and can answer your queries based on very unstructured conversations. And we think that has a huge implication for the way that government services and social care specifically is provided to citizens, the ability to digitally communicate with citizens and understand what their social care needs might be, either directing them to community guidelines or other things like that if it's relevant. But if it does need to be escalated to the contact center, using generative AI to adequately triage citizens to the relevant teams within a council to get them access to care much quicker is a massive opportunity to remove the administrative burden, but also reduce things like waiting times and dropout rates as well. So absolutely, social care is definitely something that generative AI can be used for right now.
Stelios, I think you wanted to come in. I think Imperial might want to come in as well.
Sure, very quickly. I love the question because that's usually the question I'm asking to the organizations I work with, and it has to do with your appetite. It's a little bit like when you're an investor and someone is asking you, what is your appetite in terms of investment? So AI, see that as a technology layer. So it can do from the simplest thing, which can be a bot somewhere, to the most complex things and analyze very large volumes of data and help you predict with a certain level of confidence who might need help for children's social care or adult social care. So the reason why the majority of the councils default to start using AI for internal purposes is, as Tina mentioned before, the risk appetite is not there, probably rightly so. So let's start with the safer cases to prove the value quickly. The second one is, and this is one point where I very often agitate with the councils as a resident of one, how we see ROI. I think it's a very limited point of view, because if we keep thinking that ROI is, I use AI and I save 200,000, or I save ROI and I save 1 million, how can you put a value on, I use AI and I save 5 lives? I use AI and actually 5 children that might need my help, actually they don't, because I could predict it before. So also how we see ROI, and of course it becomes so sensitive when we talk about social care, how we see ROI, we kind of need to expand our horizons. How I want to finish my answer is there are councils that have probably different appetite to ours. There is a council in the north, happy to share the name afterwards and what they're doing, that they actually start by seeing how they can use AI into social care. Because to your point, and I love the question, this is where they see the best value and return of their investment. They have actually identified 261 use cases of where by infusing AI, they can be more efficient. So I completely agree with your point. Yes, we can start with contact centers and the bot here and the bot there, but actually how we can see super useful, meaningful outcomes, it's when, we will have the appetite to test something much more sensitive as social care. But yeah, there are councils that they are moving at that pace already. Tina mentioned the point. I'm not here to advocate, go AI, run crazy, because data quality is important. So let's make sure before we run wild, we actually have confidence on our data. But yeah, the question is back to us, back to you on our appetite.
Thank you. Faisal, did you want to come in on that before we move on to the next question?
Sure. So I think one aspect about especially social care data, like also healthcare data, it's very private information. So if you have a citizen interacting with the system and they may disclose some very private things to the system, I think there needs to be some understanding of how the data is going to be used. Is it going to be used to train the chatbot, be it absorbed, or is going to be just dumped and not used at all? When we're talking about data, we also need to think about how this data is being used. So examples that were not particularly successful of AI, especially in the, at the local government level, was, for example, for local policing. We had problems in London, for example, where these predictions turned out to be both wrong and fairly racist. We had problems with social care in Canada, in Toronto, that were documented, where AI systems made wrong predictions about fraud, for example, that have been heavily prejudiced basically on the very limited training data that was available. So say you train something on on Enfield, it may not, on Enfield data, it may not work particularly well in FNH. And so the question is, how is that appropriateness of the training of the AI to the, that we call that fine-tuning by in generative AI cases, done to support the council in the best possible way? And it may look very different for different councils, and you would maybe also want to see what data was used to train this AI that is now supporting us directly and personally, beyond at the abstract level trained on English text that we can find on the internet. I think another aspect that's also important is how systems are used by people who may speak English differently, and or may not be able to enter text entirely correctly because schooling is limited, and how the AI translates or interprets that. And finally, I think there's also an aspect to consider that when AI, these bots talk to you, they talk to you multilingually, even they can speak many different languages, but they've been ultimately trained to follow a certain set of rules of behaviors, let's put it that, a bit like children, where they were told over many hundreds of thousands of hours, this is the thing you can say, this is the thing you cannot say. And we know all the examples of what, the blunders of ChatGPT in the early days. What we don't know is on what values these systems were aligned, where they trained, although these are mainly California system, rumor runs that, for example, ChatGPT was trained in South Africa simply because it was cheaper for people to interact with the system and say what's right and wrong. And so how do these values translate also across different nuances of English is also an open question. So once you have people interacting with it in earnest, and the system is realistic enough that you believe it's like a human, what are the impacts when the system is basically saying things in a way that we wouldn't say if we were talking to a human? So these are factors that I think I would want to have assurances on that could shape how I use these technologies.
Thank you. I was going to sort of say on the data issue, on complex cases, there's you haven't got commonalities. There aren't sort of things that are necessarily the same between different cases, and the data is only as good as what you actually start off with, isn't it, in terms of what you might actually get out as an ideal solution at the end. So I think there's quite a lot of questions around that. I know I'm going to bring other people in, Councillor Rowbottom, because I know there's loads of people now jumping up and down on these questions. I just wanted to pick up, Tina, on when you said about officers can come with their business case. How have we got a framework that you're assessing those business cases against? Because, for example, I was recently contacted as a councillor saying, oh, come and talk to us about this transport modelling for AI. I passed it on to officers, but it's like, how do you measure? What's your framework for whether a business case now goes forward or not? And how quickly do you do that, given that we're moving very, very quickly in this world? And then that's just sort of from what I've heard so far, then I'll bring everybody else in.
So at the moment, I would say it's still fairly informal at the sort of individual service level. At the level of a program like REAP, we would expect a standard business case similar to what we'd expect with any proposal at the council. So yes, it is still ROI in terms of financial return. I think that's the reality we're dealing with at the moment, but I would like to believe we're also looking at wider considerations.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Selous.
Thank you. I just have Professor Faisal touched on it. Just want to ask about digital accessibility implications. Obviously, as a committee, as a council and as a committee, we've looked a lot into what we're doing to make sure that residents who perhaps are not as comfortable with technology are not digitally excluded. So I just wanted to hear from you how we're considering this and making sure that a more, let's say, AI heavy council does not exclude digitally any residents who may not be comfortable with it, and especially knowing how even before they get to actually trying it, there is the perception that by moving to that stage, as has been the case with the NHS, the council is sort of would be moving behind and taking a step back, and them not being able to contact someone. We saw it in the pandemic where people would perhaps complain that they couldn't see someone face to face. So, you know, what could the implications on that be?
So I would say with REAP, which is the resident-facing access program, we're looking at the contact centres, but we're still very far away from direct resident-facing interaction. We would still engage with the digital accessibility group if there was a use case, and we'd go through co-production to make sure that we are testing whatever products we are producing, such as, you know, if it's a chatbot, for example. I think positively, sometimes generative AI is seen as a potential tool to provide access to people who don't have access. I think, as Stelios was saying, you might be able to talk, or it will get context for you, so you don't have to craft it. I think there was a use case, I forget which council, where they were using generative AI to produce easy read documents so that more of the council residents could access. So I think it's all about how you deploy the technology, and it's one of the reasons why we are going particularly slowly, because we want to be very careful that anything we do release, we understand exactly how it works and what the implications are.
Thank you. And just on a separate question, is there any sort of national legislation or framework or something that is either hindering or helping us do this work? You mentioned, for example, well, probably this question is the fact that you mentioned AI could be dealing with complaints, and I could see how this could perhaps down the line become a complicated issue given all the national regulations and legislation and restrictions. So where does AI sit perhaps on a national picture?
At the moment, the legislation, I would say, is still fairly behind, you know, so we're still talking about, is it automated decision making? We are supposed to publish our use of AI, how we use AI to make decisions. So that's where we are. I think we're trying to be in front of the legislation and to almost preempt it and think through all the potential risks. We're also engaging with other bodies to sort of understand what standards are being developed so that we can actually align ourselves to them. I think, is it that at Turing Institute, they've actually developed some standards, haven't they? So we're trying to make sure we stay informed and current, learning from other councils, learning from other organizations that have set up ethics boards, you know, to have adequate governance without being too cumbersome and prevent innovation.
Thank you. Florian, sorry, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Florian. I'm the lead member for digital inclusion in this council. Yeah, thank you, Tina. I wanted to say on the digital inclusion, so there's sort of two ways that obviously there's the co-production method, which has been tried and tested in this borough, which has been pioneered by ourselves, which ensures that any digital delivery of services is tested by our residents first. And there's also, and the chair is in the room with us, David Isaacs is also chairing the digital accessibility group. So that's also an officer and resident led group in the borough that really tests everything that we do. In terms of the legislation, I would bring your attention to three main pieces. There's President Biden's executive order on AI, there's the AI white paper for the United Kingdom, and the EU AI Act, which will be published in May and start being effective there. So you've got a variety of approaches. We have taken this country of principles approach, which isn't great. In the UK, it's more an outcomes, in the EU, sorry, it's more an outcomes based. So it's measure what the impact is, and something you could ask to Microsoft is they'll have to do a conformity assessment, and it's will they publish it and share it with us?
Perhaps Microsoft could answer that.
Yeah, and what I didn't add that on my introduction, but I'm also one of the responsible AI champs at Microsoft, which means I get the chance to question and grill my own employer on, hey, how are we working with the governments? The good thing and the reassuring is we work in partnership. So it's not, oh, on the one side, it's technology, and on the other side, it's legislation and public service. We actually work very much hand in hand. I guess as you mentioned before, and you know more than me, so I'm not trying to bluff gaslight anyone here, is we work in partnership. And what I can say is all of this technology comes with tooling that can help us also ensure that we don't discriminate in the process. So for example, as part of the responsible AI thing that I mentioned before, when the model is giving a recommendation, let's say, it shows you before you implement it who has been negatively impacted. So before you even decide to act on the model's recommendation, it tells you this individual or this group is particularly negatively impacted by the model. So then you can check you can check if there is a problem with your data, or if actually, okay, we will go with the model's recommendation. What was the last thing that I want to say? Especially in the UK and the framework that the government published a couple of months ago, it's very well aligned to the responsible AI principles that I showed you before. It's probably almost word for word the same thing, as a sign of how closely we work with the regulators of the country. Probably the most interesting thing moving forward will be, and this is kind of on the background and on lots of conversations, is when a human is interacting with an AI model, they will need to know that this response was generated by AI, or if there is an assistant on a website, this is an AI generated bot. So nobody should be under the confusion that they interact with a human if that's not human. So we're waiting with you to see where regulation will land. Obviously, they take different approaches, but definitely we work in partnership.
And just to come back, I mean, I think the US, the EU and China are probably way ahead of our government on this. I'm just wondering if there's any learnings as a massive international company, if there's any learnings that Microsoft got from that, which we could learn from, I suppose, rather, you know, because the government haven't done it yet. I think that's the case, isn't it? Florian, yeah.
But you know what? And I will try to be careful with every word. So I'm pacing myself and I'm thinking as I speak. It's an interesting process. It's You say that, however, as the UK, we said we want to be an AI-assisted, AI-driven nation. We hosted the first international effort with the AI Summit in Bletchley a couple of months back, where the UK gathered all the leaders from the world and all the leading companies to start discussing together. So many times the governments need to serve what the residents and what the citizens want to see. Coming from continental Europe, we have made the choice and we have prioritized legislation as a measure to protect the residents from unintended outcomes. In the US, you see they take a more entrepreneurial approach and they're a little bit more free-spirited. I'm not going to speak on behalf of any politician, but it will be interesting to see how we see the UK. And I think the professor has his hand up as well.
Faisal, yes.
Yes, thank you. So with my Alan Turing Institute head, so we do run the AI Standards Hub, which is a provision that we do on behalf of the UK, where councils and others can approach us and understand what are the standards, how are they evolving and implementing. So we did run the AI Summit, and one of the outcomes of that was the AI Safety Institute that's looking at these things from a bigger picture aspect. So we are leading in the UK. We won really one of the top countries for AI in the world, one of the top 3. I think what's happening is that things move very fast, and the fact that you're having this meeting and this discussion, and I've been involved in local government in my local borough, shows me that you're moving fast ahead, so you're potentially fast adopters. And I think one thing that I would want to understand, if I were you, is to what extent are technologies being trialed or live adapted while they're running in your setting. I'll give you an example. In the NHS, for example, we had companies that brought in AI to, for example, triage patients, or what doctors, or should they see a doctor or not. And these were not fully fledged complete products. By running this on patients in the NHS, they were basically training the system in live use. And that's of course a very different proposition from being proposed that you're facing and using a product. And I think here is, what are the expectations and what are assurances that you have, how the data is being used, how the system keeps up to date to what it's delivering for your council, not for the average council in the world. And how are you making sure that these systems are, for you, accountable to how the operational performance is being affected? So does the system have you an independent pathway for you to understand whether your citizens are well served? Will be an important pathway to retain.
Thanks. I will bring you in a minute, Darius, but I'm conscious there's loads of committee members wanting to ask questions. Councillor Perez.
Thank you very much. I want to know at local level, what mitigation measures do we have in place with the pilots that we may have to mitigate potential biased outputs? Now, I know the risks that you've mentioned, and I know Professor Faisal has mentioned some case studies where some pilots have identified, I think you mentioned the word, some racism in it. So what measures do we have in place to make sure that this doesn't happen at local level? That's a concern that I have. Thank you.
So the pilots that we have in place at HNF are very, very small. They're literally internal use. For example, I have a license, so I test it. I use it to summarize content. I use it to generate very limited content. It's in a way to sort of learn how the technology works, because obviously I need to be part of that movement when we start to adopt the technology and be able to share with others how to use it. When we get to anything public facing, of course, we do need to take a more rounded view. We need to understand the potential uses, what's the intention. So for example, the use case that we heard about that was positive was using it to, when you have a call center agent, a lot of time they spend time writing up case notes to summarize the conversation that they had with a resident. So it's using Copilot to actually record and then generate those notes. for a use case like that, you're talking about principles such as making sure you always review the content before you save it, making sure it's actually accurate. You do need to obviously train your staff because it depends on the staff, what they're recording and how they're interpreting that data. So it does vary on the use cases. And again, I think it is that point that we are going to have to take a case-by-case basis and put in place appropriate measures. I think it's important to have those principles. So the principle of human in the loop, making sure that we're not using biased content. But I think when, you know, when it you do still have to risk assess every single use.
Councillor Perez. Thank you very much. I'm just keen as well to hear from other colleagues. So what are your thoughts on this? How do we mitigate those potential biased outputs as well, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the point that Tina raised is a very valid one. Human in the loop is fundamental to all of this, but I think it's important for us to distinguish the types of applications here. Not every Gen AI application is learning and a model. There are closed applications that you improve and train by refining the way you instruct it through prompting. Those applications pose significantly less risk than open source applications, which are constantly sitting on large language models, which might not be hosted in the UK. You'll find a lot of applications in the public sector, especially that are closed applications, which are hosted on Microsoft Azure on the UK tenancy and things like that, which pose significantly less risk. And those are the types of applications and opportunities which are available now to the public sector to use and pilot. I think, you know, being conscious of bias, the main thing is, you know, the human in the loop, as Tina mentioned, and making sure that that human in the loop knows what to look for. The risk with generative AI at the moment is that it can be a little bit of a sort of black box where people don't actually know what they're looking into. So it's important that the people that are building the applications and the people that you're partnering with to build these applications are the right people and have the right sort of credibility, and you trust them as vendors as well. I wouldn't recommend using sort of vendors that you have no idea about but have some sort of flashy cool products. There's going to be a lot of those coming out over the years. It's important that you have a vendor and a partner that you are engaged with and are comfortable dealing with.
Okay, I'm going to bring some of the committee in. Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you. It's a really interesting discussion. I think it might have been Tina said a little earlier about, I think you described Copilot as being safer than perhaps in ChatGPT or maybe Gemini. And I'm wondering if you can tell me exactly why it's safer and in what way. So how is it safer? And then my second part of that is, what are the risks? Where do the lines lie? And how do we balance that with maximizing the opportunities and meeting the ambition?
So I'll give a brief answer and then I'll probably hand over to Stelios so he can expand. But when we talk about Copilot being safer, what we mean is there's no risk because it's locked down to our H&F network and environment. There is no risk of H&F data being put into a public ChatGPT model and being released. Because basically, if you put data into ChatGPT now, that's a public large language model. It will take that data and that becomes part of its data that it then uses to generate responses. The data that we have stays within our environment. So it's about the risk of a potential data breach. I think, Professor.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll build on everything that you said. Maybe I wouldn't say necessarily safer, but better guarded. The technology is the same effectively, but with a Copilot, because as Tina mentioned, is just on your data, it's safer, it avoids hallucinations. And also when we talk about ChatGPT, an important distinction is there is the public ChatGPT on the open web that please never, ever put any of your data there, because as Tina said, there is there is a fine print that says the data, if you put your data on the public ChatGPT, will be used for the training of the model and will be public. So please, please, please don't put your private data on a public domain. However, and probably that will touch on the point that the Chancellor Perez made before. When you deploy these models, when you deploy the co-pilots or the ChatGPT type of functionality just for Hammersmith and Fulham and your tenancy, also there is another tool that is called a content moderator. That actually, if someone puts a shady prompt and a prompt or a command that includes terms of profanity, hate, harassment, actually it stops the API call, it blocks it, and it notifies whoever is the system owner. So if someone, I wish never your organization is trying to prompt the model for some shady responses that you have no tolerance as an organization, you have the ability to moderate that, and you will be flagged, and the person who is trying to do something bad will not be able to do. So again, that's a very good guardrail to protect you and make sure that nobody's making unintended bad use of technology that can be used for the benefit of many.
Are there not ways of training it to find a way around that?
No. No. The thing is, many times bad actors manage to go a step ahead. But for example, I said the tool that is called content moderator, you set what is your tolerance on certain categories, from harassment, from profanity, from hate, as I said. And then whenever it identifies, even on a single word or in a descriptive way, something that has a negative sentiment, it takes more of a conservative approach, and it blocks the call. Actually, I tried to test that myself. Funny prompt. I was like, "Oh, write a report that the Greeks are the best nation in the world." It actually, that as a term, yeah, I could guess that from the first name. There was no term of hate, profanity, but in a very descriptive way, using several neutral words, I was trying to derive a very negative or unsubstantiated report, and actually it blocked it. It didn't return any result. And then I had to explain to my manager why I was testing this prompt. So far, it seems to be working okay, and we didn't have, so far, touch wood, any organization from the global base of organizations that we serve that actually someone used it for unintended outcomes, or as I said, a shady prompt actually made it through the cracks. So that's good.
Okay. Aldo.
Yes, thank you. So I want to stress, I'm very excited by generative AI. We want our students to use this technology. So despite me always raising the concerns, I'm actually very positive about this technology. But I want to give you just a few examples of where bias especially can come in. So for example, I think by now the systems are clean enough that they're not overtly racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist, or any other bias. I think that's been basically trained out. But I think we need to think about these type of AI systems more like colleagues that you may have that may have a certain bias. You may have a misogynist colleague, and when they're asked to summarize things, they will write them up slightly different based on what setting they are. And in large language models, it doesn't now matter which one. There have been examples, for example, where you're asking, is someone guilty of something or not? And you describe the case, and then you use words. And the only thing that you change about the description of the case is when the statements are made, whether the person who may or may not be guilty is using slang from certain minorities versus other forms of English. And the system changed its decision on the recommendations. A colleague, Valentin Hoffman in Stanford, that published that. There are other examples of biases when summarizing text that can be very subtle, and we call that covert bias, that you cannot outright read out, but systematically can push things in one direction. For example, and I'm making this example now up because it's this very specific case that's probably going to court, that is actually behind that, where you're summarizing things, and it was something that a woman did or said And this summary was basically phrased in a slightly more probabilistic way, so may have happened. While if a man would have said that, or a man said that, it would have been more affirmative in its summary of the statement. And these are covert biases that come in because they exist in the text and in the data that's out there in the world and that we have internalized. And so there may be subtle shifts that you will not see. And it's maybe just like, hiring a biased colleague who's basically doing things in a certain way, but it may escape because it's subtle, but it propagates at scale, affecting hundreds of thousands of summaries or texts. And that's something to be aware of. And this is something that we researchers and scientists are thinking about how to deal with that. But as you're leading in this, it may also impact your citizens earlier than others.
Thank you. Councillor Brockbank-Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. Tina, can you tell me how large your working group is on AI in the council?
I'm going to estimate at the moment, but I think it's about 8 people. So we have myself, our data protection officer, we have our enterprise architect who's our lead, and then we have various other reps from information security, and we have service reps, so housing, contact centers, the REAP program specifically, BI, and then other members join as needed, but around 8 standing members, and we meet every fortnight.
And you said that you're reactive to proposals from officers in other council departments. When do you feel, or do you have the expertise within your working group to actually innovate and do something?
So we actually led the way. So we proposed the working group. Actually, I set it up when I was still head of strategy. And we were the ones who initially started looking at use cases, doing research, interacting with Gartner, who've done a lot of research on the topic, looking at various products that were available on the market, such as those developed by Microsoft and Agilicis. So we actually developed a database of use cases and thought about how to assess them. I think the research is there. It's about actually how do you then deploy it and scale up, which is where we need to kind of work collaboratively with other services and have proper business cases to scale up.
So do you have specific funding in order to progress this? I mean, how dynamic could the council be? Do you need funding? Do you need expertise? Do you need other meetings and so on to make a significant difference in the borough?
So the working group doesn't have any funding. We put some seed funding to buy the licenses. I think the funding that we have via the REAP program should be sufficient to get us started and allow us to then build up from there. I do still think it's technology. We need to understand it. We do still need to interact with experts. So I think where we are, especially with the REAP funding, we should be in a good position. I don't know if other officers want to add anything.
Okay, well, look, thank you for that. But following on, perhaps I can ask the professionals here, what experience have you had with other councils? I mean, if we contain it within council, I think that's probably fairer than other businesses and so on.
Yep, I'm happy to take that one. We've worked with a range of councils across different GenAI use cases. We have a particular development partner around the sort of Manchester region that we develop a lot of different use cases with, and it doesn't spin out from necessarily a working group structure per se, but more of just a organization that has a clear view on what innovation looks like from their perspective. It's not necessarily a group of individuals that are driving a considerable change, but it is the top leadership level, you know, CTO, Director of Strategy and Innovation. They were, and they still are actively trialing out different Gen AI use cases, and that's not limited to meeting minutes and things like that as well. That's definitely part of the things that they're doing, but they're also looking at social care pilots. They're looking at how Gen AI can be used for complaints, freedom of information and things like that in a structured and contained way. It hasn't been rolled out across the council without any consideration. But those are what we call development partners, and we are co-developing products with them. And that starts from use cases like meeting minutes, which then increase Gen AI maturity across a council, that we find things like Copilot and other similar platforms are helpful as, there's sort of gateway wedge type tools that helps council understand the different use cases. Because then the natural question, like the question from Councillor Robotham, is what about social care? That's a pretty big area that we can use this technology for. That sort of activity does happen quite often, but I would say that the councils that have differentiated themselves, the ones that we've worked with, are the ones that from the top level down, it has been a message of innovation and continuous learning, but they have set aside some funding to innovate with it as well.
We also have something called a partner club, where we have 8 or 9 of our large local authorities that we meet on a regular basis, share ideas, share examples of the journey they're going on. And I'm more than welcome to invite Tina and anyone else to join, so they can share the experience of the work that we're doing with other partners.
Can I just ask on the back of that? I'll come back to you, Councillor. Can I just ask, how many councils does Agilicis actually work with, and how many would you say are sort of like the Manchester example that you've just given? How many are kind of up there and really being at the front of this? Yeah, so I think you'll have to forgive me, Eugene. I think the total Agilicis wider council numbers around sort of 60 councils or so. Our key partners is a group of 10. I would put a group of 4 in that sort of development partner role, where they're sort of actively trialing and contributing to Gen AI platforms and products, which they are co-developing with us. We have, a group of about 15 engaged Gen AI councils, I would say, but there is about 4 or 5 that are probably at the top of the innovation pyramid, I'd say, at the moment for us. Thanks. Councillor Brockbank-Fowler.
I think that's fine for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on in terms of this discussion about social care in particular and use of data, I think that's probably a bit further down the road, but presumably in building these models bespoke for Hammersmith and Fulham, the idea is to sort of pour all of our data in them for social care, housing, whichever service it might be, that can then be used to generate predictive outcomes or decision making in terms of our residents and what they need in terms of, be it social care. Presumably in terms of the sort of getting away from silo working, the idea would be to not just use social care data, but to use data that's more broadly across the council, so you can sort of commingle it. But I guess the question there is, wondering how this has been used, or potentially how it's been used elsewhere, is how do we understand, so what is the sort of volume of data that we'd really need, I suppose, in order to make good, on social care, for example, to make good predictions, because you're going to need a sort of critical mass of data before you can really use it for that sort of use. And how can we, so what's the sort of volume of data we'd need? How, given that we're a reasonably sized but not enormous council, how would we do that for our own, in our own example? And also, how would we sort of tackle bias as a result of that? Because clearly the data is the data that we've got based on the sort of makeup of the people whose data it is effectively, and that may or may not predict a good example for, person A, B, C and D. So I just wonder, in terms of all of those issues, how can we understand, how will we be able to understand how it's been used, and whether the predictive or decision making that comes out of predictions or decisions that come out of that are appropriate given all of those issues with the data that we've got?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to pick that one up. So there's obviously the social care element to it, and all the use cases I sort of discussed earlier. There's multiple ones, one of which is leveraging predictive analytics and things like deep learning to get a better understanding of how likely someone is to enter the care system. The same could be said for children looked after and things like that as well. With regards to the volume of data, I don't have a specific number in the amount of years worth of data that would be required, but usually the way that we approach this is we do a sort of very light discovery project type approach at the beginning using anonymized data to understand if there is signals in the data that allows us to make accurate predictions and basically understand how dependable the potential prediction is. So doing that sort of activity at the front of any engagement like that, I think is a necessary prerequisite. And that's very much one way of doing that. I would not recommend pouring, social care data into a product and seeing what happens sort of thing. At that sort of discover phase, I think is really important. We try and move away from the old school products where we do these deep data cleansing and mapping exercises for 6 months only to identify that actually the product can't work. I think this is more a few weeks to a month trying to understand the data set and how accurate we get the model, and then you come to a joint decision whether you want to roll it out in a phased approach as well. Those are the sort of ways that we combat things like that are predictive learning. It's the same with understanding how likely people are to attend their hospital appointments and things like that. It's the same approach we take. Obviously, social care and children looked after and things like that, much more heightened risk. So there are certain measures that you need to put in place ahead of that as well.
Stelios?
Very quickly, because it was a good question. When we talk about AI in social care, we don't necessarily only mean predictions. I had the pleasure of spending a day following a field worker, and we can use AI to make them more efficient, because the frontline worker was going to provide care to the vulnerable adult, then had to drive back to the office, type the notes, sometimes couldn't understand the notes that they were keeping on a notepad, losing time. So we can use AI. Hey, how can you actually use AI to dictate the notes to your phone, and then the technology can convert speech to text without the frontline worker having to even forget notes and come back to the office and then type everything. So let's not necessarily obsess with, we will use that for prediction. There are so many other use cases to help their life. Then on your point on how much data do we need, I'll give you two short answers. The one is, as a technology provider, when we build solutions, we say it's not a volume question, it's a quality question. So based on the outcome you want to drive, what is the right data to have? So we don't say, hey, it's a volume thing, but let's say we have the right data rather than the everything data. The second short answer that I want to give is, there is though a value in running or applying these models over large data sets, because they can identify patterns that you, me, us as humans, we might be missing. So when you say to the model, by, of course, putting the right parameters and ensuring nothing bad will happen with the data, actually it can identify correlations that we might be missing and say, when this is happening, 80% of the times that is following. So that was my answer. First one, use the right data. But second of all, there is a value on using technology to process much larger amounts of data than our human intelligence can actually process.
Thanks very much. So, I mean, I'll move on from that. It's an interesting reflection as to how that would work, so that it sounds like we wouldn't necessarily need to dump a load of data in to start off with, but you will be able to work with what potentially would work with what we've got in order to generate stuff on the sort of predictive side, certainly take on board the produce and for other uses. I mean, in terms of AI, have we used it yet to produce any sort of council reports or minutes yet? And when might we do that sort of thing to help our clerks and others to, produce the minutes for these meetings?
I think that will have to be an internal conversation that we take away, but not yet, not official minutes.
And just finally, what are the sort of timelines on developing some of this work? It sounds like we've been doing some work on it for about 12 months now. I mean, when might there be a bit more, not that we necessarily need rollout, but rollout of some of the uses of AI across parts of the council at least?
So we're rolling out Copilot for Bing as we speak, basically. That is just a general tool to accustom the staff with the technology. timelines for the contact center or for housing use cases, I think I'll have to get back to you about those, because those are we're just starting the conversations now.
Thank you. Councillor Trey, sorry to leave you last.
No, that's absolutely fine. Hello, and thank you. Thank you. It's been fascinating. And I really only have a couple of comments really, or questions. Because the one thing, maybe looking at companies that have brought this in better in advance, have been early adopters, what you're finding are the implications for the actual people, because it's human-led. There's a relationship between the people that are using it and what it does to them. What we found with social media is, you know, does it change our way of working? Does it change our mental abilities? And also, productivity going up, does that make us a different worker? Because we end up having to make decisions quicker because we aren't doing the manual labor of typing that might reinforce a story in our head. There's questions around that, and then the sort of structure of companies, that you're changing the workforce because you're changing what they do. And I can't help but be really point out that the danger that we've seen in the Horizon and the post office is that people were the people responsible for ruining people's lives. Sorry, but because people were convinced that the computer could not be wrong. And so how do we make sure that people are making sure that the computer is right? Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very valid point. Stelios is jumping up and down to answer.
Yeah, because and the professor might correct me. I will go for the A+ on the first point of the answer, but let's see what grade I will get with. Your CEO, actually, we had the pleasure of presenting before Easter, and she said the same, or she agitated, like, are we becoming lazy? You sell it as productivity, but are we becoming lazy, and are we losing skills? And thank God recently I read a book, I don't remember from who, but was saying this is human evolution. And there was the example of fire, because AI is kind of the same as when we invented fire as humans. Actually, before we invent fire, we had bigger stomachs, because it was taking us longer to digest food, and we were able to hunt. So we had the skills that we had to give away as humans, as more technology, and every tool that we use and every invention that we make is part of our evolution. So is our body and is our brain going to change? 100%. And I will leave it to the scientists who are already doing studies and see how the human brain is going to change. My point of view is that it's part of the evolution. So we should probably feel a little bit more accustomed that this is the journey that we are on. On your second point, I think the answer is it's up to us to form the right organizations, because the organizational structure that we had before is not going to serve us for the future. So how do we build an organization that is not becoming super reliant or dependent on technology, but actually, I'll repeat the term that many times we said, human in the loop. And I'll finish with that. The reason also why we talk so much about responsible AI is because AI has the power to jeopardize for us as humans to be the dominant species on the planet, because it's so much smarter than us. So how can you necessarily control something that you don't understand how it works end to end? So I think we just need to make sure that we are not we keep the humans in the loop, that we are responsible for the end outcomes, and we don't blindly follow what the model said, what ChatGPT said, because they do hallucinate, they do make mistakes. Therefore, this is why we advise use these tools to make us more productive, more efficient. And I'm glad to see the professor also having his hand up. But yeah, it's up to us.
Aldo, would you like to come in on that point?
Yeah, just very briefly. I think the answer to this is education. We've introduced AI systems with medical doctors, and to our surprise, they were very much influenced by an AI saying something more than they should have been. And so it's about education for our children and the programs in education that we're thinking about. In your case, it's educations of your citizens who may be elderly or adult at least. And that requires information about that text that may not come from a human, but it is an actual AI. For some, it's difficult to realize that it's really truly artificial, and what it means about how true, how correct, how trustful, or whether one can challenge that or not. Because for some people, a computer is an absolute. And I think this is about communication that you're already doing and just augmenting that aspect, that how you would introduce AI and how it may affect people and what ways people have to deal and manage with this AI.
Thank you. Councillor Daly, and then I'm going to move on.
Thank you. Actually, I think I'm aiming this mostly at Professor Faisal, sorry. You were talking about moving forwards ethically and fairly and safely. Obviously, right now, we've heard that we're taking some very small steps, but the whole point of iterative pilots is that to roll forwards and to move on with it. There are organisations out there who have been navigating how they can make sure that they're acting ethically and fairly and safely. And I wondered if there were any models or any learnings that we should be taking out there and putting into place here that will just make sure that when we move from our small business cases one by one, that we have some kind of steering committee or board or some oversight to make sure that we do stay on that path.
Brilliant questions. So I think on the side of the Alan Turing Institute, which is the National Institute of AI, we've been working with a lot of different initiatives and activities there. And just to take it off, I'm very happy to introduce you in signpost you to the right people. On the other side, you're lucky in that you have one of the world-leading AI universities right at the doorstep, and we would be very happy to advise and support you. We're academia, we're not a distance, so we're neutral ground, and I'm very happy to involve myself or point you to the right people who can advise you on these things.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Ree, before I kind of bring this session to an end, is there anything as cabinet member with the weight of responsibility on your shoulders of making sure this goes well for Hammersmith and Fulham? Is there anything that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I thought that was a really fascinating discussion. So thank you very much to everyone who's come along to contribute, and thank you to all the committee members for asking questions. I really learned a lot actually this evening, and I hope that you did too. Chair, at the beginning of the session, you said that technology in this area is developing very, very quickly. I think that's absolutely right. You know, all organisations, whether it's universities, central government, the private sector, everybody is rushing to try and harness the benefits of innovation in AI, and so that they can get the benefits. And it seems like at the moment you either move with the times or you get very much left behind. In too much of local government, I think there is an attitude that things should be done in a way that they've always been done, right? That's the safe option. It's always been done like this, so we should just carry on doing it. And I'm very keen to make sure that here in Hammersmith and Fulham, that's not what we do. Right? If there are better ways to do things, if there are ways that get more value for residents, if there are ways that we can spend taxpayers' money better, then we should absolutely be embracing those. And I think AI and technology are areas that we can definitely be looking at more. And I'm very keen that we do pursue those in the future. As I said, there are two sort of reasons for doing this. Firstly, the fact that our funding from central government has been cut by 56% in real terms since 2010. You know, out of necessity, we need to look at how we can do things more efficiently, but also because we want to make sure that residents are getting the best outcomes from the services that we're providing. That's why we got into public service, and it seems to me that there are huge opportunities through AI, through other forms of technology, to be able to improve the lives of the people that we're here to represent. I wanted to mention some of the things that we've been investing in recent years. So we've talked a lot about generative AI. Sorry, I'll be able to say it properly at some point in the future, I'm sure. Generative AI. We've been discussing that a lot this evening. But we've been investing a lot in robotic process automation in a lot of our services. Now, this speeds up the way that we're able to handle requests from residents, and it allows us to deliver services more efficiently. Matt here and the business intelligence team do a fantastic job in analysing the data that we hold as a council, so that we can plan projects and prioritise spending across the council and across the borough. I agree with Stelios with a point you made towards the end, that it's sort of like the discovery of fire, AI, right? Where it's going to change the way that we all operate, the way that we go about our day-to-day lives, and yeah, it can be hugely productive for us. We've heard about a host of possibilities this evening, and as a council, I'm very keen that we get behind those and we're able to harness those for our residents. There are 2 points I wanted to draw on specifically in this meeting. Firstly, co-production, something that we've talked about quite a lot this evening. I want to commend Florian and David, who's here with us this evening, for the fantastic work that they've been doing in terms of digital accessibility. Co-production, I think, really is core to how we work as a council. It's not just a case of putting in place a service and then going back to test it with the residents to make sure that they're able to work within it. The way that the services are designed is very much with the residents at the heart, so that it's fulfilling the needs that they have and it's addressing the problems that they're raising. We've always been doing this in the way that we operate, and this is how we're going to be going forward in terms of our use of technology. The residents I've spoken to have all been very excited about the possibilities that this could bring about. And the second point is on data and sheer quantity of data that we have as a council. Professor Faisal rightly raised this, I think, towards the start of the meeting. Yeah, we hold all sorts of information in different parts of the council about different ways that people live their lives, and I'm very keen to make sure that we're able to use all of that information the best possible way we can, so that we make sure that we're designing services that address the lives of the people as they actually are, not just as we imagine them to be. It was a very generous offer that you made, Professor Faisal, to meet with us to discuss this, and I'm going to bite your hand off, I think, and take you up on that. So thank you very much. So I'll leave it there. I just want to say that as a council, we're very much open to embracing new technology and the benefits that it can bring. We're determined to make sure that these developments are delivered with residents rather than to them. And we know that this will make a positive impact to people's lives across the borough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. I think I'm just going to sum up. I think we've had some really good contributions, and it seems to me that probably in terms of the processy bit, so just processing things like forms and answers to questions and things like that, it's probably relatively straightforward. Where we get into the sort of more ethical areas is when we're talking about trying to predict cases or to predict things and using quite a lot of people's data to do that. And it's quite clear we've got a lot more work to do around that. This is the first time this council has actually had a substantive item talking about AI, and it won't be the last. I think your work group sounds fascinating, but for example, you said some of the service heads come along if there's a particular interest or there's a particular item. I think we probably need to move on from that and embed it a bit more, because I know service heads are being approached all the time by companies and things offering services relating to, you know, modelling that they've done using AI and things like that. So I think, you know, we do need to have a structure. So when whoever comes to you for a bid to say we want to go down this road, we've got some sort of structure in place in terms of how we judge that. So I think there's a long way to go, but it sounds like from what everybody's said this evening, we're probably a long way ahead of a lot of councils, a lot of public bodies, but behind others possibly. So I think some of those examples that have been mentioned today would be really useful as well. I think at the heart of all of this, and we talked about bias as well, so that there's issues that we need to kind of record in terms of our concerns around that. But at the heart of it, it is about our borough's residents. And we have talked about the digital access group. We have talked a lot about resident services through the REAP, etc. And thank you, David, for sitting and listening to all of this tonight, because you've been absolutely critical in terms of the digital access group. I think that's the point here. We've got to make sure that it works for our residents. I think there's a bit of a fear out there amongst our residents, and I can't remember who mentioned it. It might have been Professor Faisal, but it was about education as well. You know, it's so somebody like me, I go online and I've got a problem with something and I get a little chat box that tells me the answers. It doesn't usually tell me the answers, because normally it just tells me a standard answer, which is completely irrelevant to the answer that I want. And so I then end up having to go through some of the long rigmarole. But people, you know, not everybody's familiar with that kind of process. So there's a long way to go, particularly if we've got vulnerable residents reaching out to us for whatever issue it is. So it's how do we utilise? There's a lot more in this. So I feel this is going to come back to this committee at probably not too long. But in the meantime, I think we've got quite a lot of action points to go off and work on. So could I just thank everybody? Thank you very much. I think we're all going to come and talk to Imperial at some point. So thank you for joining us from Germany, is it? I think somewhere like that. Thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you, everybody. We're going to take 5 minutes comfort break now, and then we'll have an update on the cost of living. Thank you. Good evening again, everybody. We are now in the second section of the Policy and Oversight Board this evening, and we are going to have a update on the cost of living, which is something that officers have been working on to try and support our residents for quite some time now. I'm going to ask, I think, Matt Sells to introduce this update for us.
I'm actually going to hand over to Bashiba, who's going to give you a short presentation, just summarising key points from the report.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Councillor Homan. David, I think, is going to try and get some slides up, but in the meantime, hopefully, oh, there we go. There we go. Thank you. So, really, this is to summarise all of the activity we've been dealing with or delivering over the last year and a half, 2 years. September 21 is when the programme started. Can we go to slide 2, please? So this is a fairly comprehensive programme delivering a range of measures supporting our low-income households that are particularly exposed to the economic challenges of the cost of living. The funding for this has come through the Household Support Fund, so it's endeavouring to provide financial relief for those households, and we've been providing something like 25 schemes over the last 2.5 years or so, 17 services involving multiple partners across the voluntary and community sector. I spend somewhere in the region of 3.5 million, of which our share which includes 2.8 million of Household Support Fund itself, as well as our council contributions. Very disappointingly, I think we've been slightly, we struggled a little bit with the timing of this, as always. It's a pattern that we've had in previous years of delivery as well, and it's no different on this tranche of funding as well. So we had something like 2 weeks notice that they were going to actually continue with that funding. And that's going right the way through to September. Again, 6 months, previous versions were a year, and then 6 months, 6 months. So quite fragmented and disjointed. So some examples of some of the work we've been doing. We've worked really closely with our alliance partners, developing a steering group and utilising their expertise and knowledge to kind of feed into the programme to shape some of that delivery. Looking to continue that involvement with new conferences, as well as building on the previous events that we've done, all learning that's kind of shaping the programme's delivery, hopefully targeting it in a much more focused way. And key amongst some of those priorities identified by the partners has been the digital signposting platform, which we are imminently about to launch into the programme delivery of. We're hoping to see that launch in September 24, and it really kind of touches on some of the earlier discussions that the councillors were having with our AI representatives. It's I don't think we've got AI built into this. I don't think we're that far along, but it's certainly a marker in terms of how we can engage with residents on a digital level, also bearing in mind, obviously, issues around exclusion. This is a way of engaging with our residents that's hopefully going to make them slightly more self-supporting in terms of identifying services and things like that. A couple of more comments really around some of the other support we've done with our third sector. Our Winter Support Fund proposal landed really well. We provided £340,000 funding to 35 organisations. Some really interesting data around the groups that it supported, 77% of those coming from marginalised, disadvantaged groups, so really needing that economic, financial, just pause there for a second. Yeah, so really needing that financial support in the worst possible way, and it's good to see that that particular scheme landed so well. We've helped 50% of those groups, for example, from families with children. That's been a particular priority group, as have been multiple ethnic communities as well. Priority groups, as I just touched on significantly, we've been able to provide a new scheme supporting families who've got a disabled person living in their household, some eligibility around that, some support in terms of sorry, I've gone around the wrong way on this, focusing on care experienced young people as well, £150 of support given over twice in kind of like a phased approach. Particular support as well for people setting up home for the first time and living independently for the first time. So costs such as furniture, carpeting, for example, has to go in new every time, so that's a huge cost. And it's things like that which make a massive amount of difference in terms of how care experienced young people are able to kind of simulate and sort of start beginning to live life a bit more independently. So that support is much needed. Crisis prevention, in terms of our local support, again, a new scheme. We provided something like £900 worth of funding as a maximum. That's really to kind of support an emergency or kind of immediate need, so in crisis, and that can go towards anything really. So for example, washing machine breaking down, significant arrears up to a certain threshold, and incorporating within that referrals to our debt advice partners, Crosslight. So we've been working quite closely with alliance partners, as I pointed out earlier, and Crosslight have been able to kind of partner up with some debt advice on managing money, maximising incomes, and financial literacy. And then finally here, a point around the food bank. We've been working with them to develop some new schemes to kind of improve healthy eating, for example, and that's gone quite well. That's just a new initiative which has started, and that's kind of supplementing the kind of high level of need and demand, something like 5,800 food parcels being delivered across the borough, which is a huge amount. So it's really trying to kind of taper some of that down in terms of providing healthier options. And kind of links back also to the signposting work. One of the kind of outcomes of that hopefully will be to provide early intervention. If we've got referrals, case management and so on, it means that we're able to get to the residents a little bit earlier, perhaps avoid some of that escalated need further down the line. So I'm going to pause there for some questions.
I'm sure people have got questions. Any questions to officers or? That's.
Thank you so much for the update. This is obviously like so important. I'm almost receding my question because I was going to ask what has been the kind of like most impactful aspect in terms of making a difference, like money going to the right place at the right time. And have you pivoted from, I know you did a large amount of work last year and some things were seasonal. Have there been any amends, I guess, to the delivery of this in order to target people in a different way or a more effective way?
Thank you. I'm Matt Sales, Assistant Director here, and I've been the officer lead for our cost of living programme. I think it'd be very hard for us to kind of pick one of the schemes above others in terms of being most impactful. I think that's a very difficult question for us to answer. But what we've tried to do through the schemes that we've supported, for example, Bathsheba was referencing the crisis prevention funds, that's been a cash first approach. That's one of the first times, or the first time the council's done that. So we've tried to do all that we can to have the most impact, if you see what I mean. And we've, you know, through the 25 schemes, they've been delivered with almost 50 delivery partners, both council services, external partners. So we feel we've reached far and wide into the borough. Our dedicated cost of living advice team, for example, and we're one of the only authorities to have that dedicated team. That supported last financial year almost 6,000 residents. So we do think we are reaching far and wide in the borough. It's very difficult for us to isolate what's been the most impactful. In terms of have we responded in year? Yes, we have. We've been tracking a range of different indicators of impact in the borough and how residents have been impacting. And we have flexed and responded to that in discussion with the cabinet member. So for example, we have increased housing support during the course of the year because that's been one of the key areas impacted by the cost of living, rents rising and service charges, utilities, inflation, and so on. And we also reacted, for example, Bathsheba mentioned the winter support funds. That's the 340,000 that we invested in grants in third sector organisations. Because of the demand, when we originally went out with that scheme, because of the demand and the quality of the applications that we received with Councillor Harvey's agreement, we actually increased our grant value so that we could reach more residents. And I think overall, that scheme alone has helped around 4,000 households, in the borough. So yeah, we've tried to respond to demands and needs as they've arisen in the year.
Councillor Rowbottom, do you want to come back on your point?
Well, just actually, I had one specific question, which is very brilliantly, there are now obviously 3 family hubs across the borough. And I was speaking to some people at the Old Oak launch last week about the fact that actually, so these were people who are providing services, supporting people with benefits, and a lot of it's referral by word of mouth and stuff. And they said it's very effective. They all, sadly can't kind of keep pace with the rate at which people are being referred in, because they've got kind of like this trusted network. Basically, I wondered how we are monitoring that demand, and I know it's a very tight financial times, but how we can commensurately support according to, if we do have a stream of people who are coming to us despite the stigma of having to get the support, how we can make sure we meet the demand, basically. Maybe particularly around family hubs would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key reasons the cost of living advice team has been in place is to help residents to maximise income. And that's what some of that advice and referrals will be about. So they've been there to do that. I think we need to make the connections with the family hubs to understand how we can work and close those kind of links into the cost of living. And also how we can work better as a council to look at referrals right across all services and with our partners. I mean, one of the key things Bathsheba mentioned, for example, is we've developed links with Crosslight, where we provided an additional grant so they could provide extended debt advice and money management support to residents. So we're working across that cost of living alliance as part of our response, and we'll continue to do that, including building links to the family hubs.
I'm going to bring Councillor Perez in, but just on that exact point, I'll bring Councillor Harvey in as well. On that point, it seems to me that one of the kind of pluses from all of this work is the alliance, because they're so connected, not just around this issue, but around issues more generally than perhaps was previously the case. And I certainly went to the family hub opening in Fulham at the Tudor Rose Centre, and I noticed that quite a lot of the people that we might refer to, for example, are part of that alliance. So I was familiar with some of the people from the alliance. So I think that in itself is probably built a stronger relationship, and I just wondered if you could comment on that, and then I'll thank Councillor Perez. Harvey, you might want to come in with your answer and maybe comment on the stronger relationships we have.
Sure. What I was going to comment on was we have created a winter booklet again for the cost of living this year, and we did one the year before. But this year we targeted schools and GP practices. So you will see and libraries. So in that booklet, it's got lots of information and advice around income maximisation, benefits and debt, financial inclusion grants. So it's something that is there to help people. And it might actually encourage take up of advice services, because people become aware of what they could be potentially entitled to. They'll then go and seek advice to get that help. But we are investing quite a huge amount of money in our advice service in the borough and with our third sector as well. In relation to the point, Lisa, that you were saying about stronger partnerships, we have a really fantastic alliance group, steering group, that come and meet every 6 weeks and are working really closely with Matt and Bathsheba to deliver priorities that the wider alliance have said what they would like. And the signposting tool is one of those key elements, but I'll let them talk about that. But one of the really great things that was recently said at the last Alliance Steering Group meeting was it feels really great that we are actually producing something, and we're not just sitting in a room talking, but we've actually said we want to do something, and now it's coming alive. It's actually going to happen. And they didn't believe when they started this journey that would happen. So we've worked really hard with our third sector to build up really strong relationships and deliver as well, which is great.
Thank you. Councillor Perez.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic to see how all sectors are coming together. The third sector, we're also involved in that process and also building those partnerships and collaborations. Fantastic to hear as well that you've got that signposting and referral or signposting tool in place. So I've got one question in relation to that. So who will be coordinating the signposting and referral tools, because that requires somebody to monitor incoming referrals if that's happening as well, and who's coordinating that. Also in relation to the partners that are involved, are we also supporting the partners individually as individual organizations? So Crosslight, for example, are we also funding the provision of those services at local level that clearly are so important?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really I could talk all night about what signposting could be doing for us. We've started looking at it at a very basic level in terms of basic signposting. That's the starting point, and then referrals, possibly case management, that kind of build into that some longevity. So once it's established, embedded across the organization, then we'll look to kind of develop it in that way. I think your point about Crosslight was really, really good. We've been working with them quite closely around money maximization, financial literacy. We've done training across the organization internally. We've got I think at the moment they've got 66 residents that we've gone through a referral process with. 11 of them are in receipt or in the process of receiving debt relief orders as well. So there's real synergy in terms of how we're working with them, and a lot of that has been built through the Alliance. They've identified the priorities, they've been driving the agenda. The signposting was a really key priority for them. They flagged it at every single event, and we've been able to take that forward.
Yep,
thank you.
Just mention something that Bashiva said, just because it feels great to be able to say it. As part of our strategy last year, we funded the cost of debt relief orders to help people that needed to apply for them, because you can't get funding, you have to usually apply for grants. So as part of our strategy, we actually funded it in the council. And then what was really great is the government this year decided that actually they were changing the rules so that people didn't have to pay for debt relief orders. So it was really nice to see that we were ahead of time and ahead of the government on it to help people. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and just to finish up on that question, I'm sorry I didn't complete it. In terms of delivering it, it's project led by me at the moment, hoping we can find some more resources to support it. We've got a great project team set up across the organisation, so representatives from the different service areas as well, kind of feeding into it. So digital strategy, accessibility, engagement, all of those elements are hopefully going to be covered.
Brilliant, thank you very much. In relation to the household support fund, so please correct me if I'm wrong, so will it finish in September, or is there a possibility of continuity? And what impact, if it's not extended, will this have in the continuation and the sustainability of the fantastic model that you have in place?
Yeah, so on the 6th of March, I think it was, the Chancellor announced the 6-month extension. And so that's from 1st of April to the 30th of September. We've got no certainty or clarity at the moment, and we may not get any until very late in the day on what might happen with household support funds thereafter. Of course, we might have a general election around that time, so it could be perhaps the end of this current round, but we don't know. We'll have to see. So it was a really important source of funding for us last year, 2.83 million. We've got half of that for 6 months, and that's going to be an important source of funding over this period, although the council also put in additional funding, recognising the importance of cost of living, which we've drawn down and will continue to use in this financial year as well. If it doesn't exist, that's going to place a great deal of pressure on the council to stop things or to find alternate funding. It's difficult to predict until we get the kind of clarity on the future, but it's not helpful in thinking through some of the sort of structural issues that lay behind and around the cost of living. You can't plan your response and actions if you've got such temporary funding. So yeah, it would be great to get more certainty on that in time.
Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed as part of the report, it talks about building economic resilience and inclusive economy, and mentions some of the work that's been done about improving skills, sort of accessing employment through H&F Works and the Adult Learning Service. and also working with local businesses. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that and how much, I mean, obviously it may not be the main focus of the work, but how much take-up there's been of training and skills, and whether businesses, as well as receiving support, have also been able to employ people in the borough.
I think we may have to come back to you on those questions. So absolutely kind of economic resilience, helping people into work and skills, etc., has been part of our strategy throughout. What we're referring there is some of these are long-standing the programs that the council has funded around employment and skills development. And we've been, so for example, building the links from residents that might come into the advice team. They might be signposted. Are you aware of H&F Works? You can go there for skills, for CV training, for job opportunities. It's those kind of things and links that we've been seeking to look at. We haven't provided any sort of additional funding around those things. I mean, in the Cost of Living Alliance, though, it's got business representative organisations and businesses. We've been keen to get their kind of voice at the table as well. So, for example, the BIDs have attended conferences and events, and we've been a key supporter of the programme is our economic development team, and we liaise with them regularly. But it's not something we've provided dedicated funding to.
I mean, so some other point I'll be interested to hear a bit more about the, as you say, it's probably a broader programme that continues to work, but it's good that people have been signposted in that way as part of this work.
Just on that, is there signposting to apprenticeships anywhere within that?
H&F Works does that.
Yeah. Thanks. Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, can I just say thank you on behalf of residents for some fantastic work delivered over the last year and a half. And it's been really quite immense and quite a huge workload for everybody. Some of the things that have happened and have happened at quite a lot of speed, a lot of the innovation that's gone on, things like being able to develop the signposting tool itself, finding new ways to assess need, definitely some successes and some failures probably within that, bringing together this huge alliance and these kind of working parties, and actually within the council itself, the kind of cross-departmental work. A lot of what you've been doing in the last 18 months has been really innovative and really new, and I wondered if you'd found a way of capturing what it is that you've done in a way that you can sort of take that essence, if you like, and move on with it and bring it to other areas and other kind of areas of need within the borough.
Yes, so we're absolutely keen to evaluate what we've done and how things have gone and to learn from that. And we're doing that on an ongoing basis. I think it was Councillor Rowbottom asked an earlier question about how you've responded in year. So we've tried to learn as we've gone through, but absolutely, we want to learn and evaluate now. We're doing some analysis at the moment, looking back at some of the data that we've achieved in 23-24 to look at how we can learn from that. So what's gone particularly well from the data and what can we learn from it? Areas where we didn't meet our expectations and so on. I'm slightly hesitating because what's happened is developing the strategy for 24-25 has kind of got in the way in completing that, because we're working with Councillor Harvey at the moment because we've got this immediate 6-month window for the Household Support Fund. So the priority is on that, deciding our strategy for 24-25. But we will be looking more to evaluate the success of 23-24 and look where we can use it more widely in the council.
Any further questions?
If I may just add to that, one of the things that I'm really keen for us to do is to take all that learning that we've done along with our corporate plan and build that into financial inclusion strategy and thinking about the needs of our third sector who reflect the residents across the borough as well. So there's a lot of work still to be done, and the financial inclusion element of it will be really important to bring businesses together, but of core partners across the borough who work with people around money and poverty so that we can look at it holistically and and building on some really great successes. So I know we haven't got anyone here tonight from the food bank, but at the recent Steering Alliance group meeting, Phil from the food bank was telling us that he'd done some work around accessing food directly from the supplier through another organisation, and it saved him 40% of the cost, which means that money can be reinvested into other food for other residents. So yeah, there's so much learning that we can build on the successes.
You may perhaps need some AI to make sense of all of that.
Probably.
Yeah, do you mind if I just add one more point around the point that Councillor Daly was making? It's been really reactive, the Household Support Fund. It's been incredibly fast paced. It doesn't give us local authorities an awful lot of time to develop strategies, and we're having to double up on things like the compliance and regulations. So we've just gone through this reporting process as well as having to develop the strategy. What it also doesn't allow us to do is build any prevention into the work. So whilst we can learn from the lessons learned approach, monitoring and reporting, that feeds into everything we're doing. What it doesn't allow us to do sufficiently well is putting that upstream approach. And having something like signposting, it is an innovation, but it's not meant to be delivered in this way. It's not meant to be a preventative piece of work. It's meant to be reactive, and that's where the support fund falls down. It doesn't build into the programme opportunities for us as local authorities to cover the burden of the admin, for example. It would be good to see, for example, maybe 20% cost going into kind of, help us deliver some of these schemes in a much more kind of agile, efficient way.
On the back of that, have you been feeding that back, and are other local authorities feeding back that very point about long-term prevention?
Absolutely, yes, through the cost.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on this report? I think it's something that's not going away, so you'll probably give us an update at some point in the future. It'll be very interesting to see what happens when the current stream of funding stops. We might be in an entirely different political world. I suspect our residents will still be struggling with the cost of living for a while yet. So we will revisit it at some point in the future. But in the meantime, I think lots of the learning we can actually build into what we do as a council, regardless of the funding, so that we can actually, be more responsive to residents. And something like the signposting tool won't go away. It's going to be there. So it's all worth doing, and it will be sustainable regardless of the funding. But funding going forward would obviously be really useful. So thank you for that update. Thanks very much. So that leaves me just a couple of items left. So I will go to the reports that have been provided from the latest packs. Do any of the chairs want to comment on any of the notes? I know that the last group of packs were only a week ago, so I don't know if anything came up that anybody wants to highlight from their particular packs. Councillor Brockbank-Fowler.
No, there isn't. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Just one thing I'm going to pick out, I think, from the climate change pack. You had an item on greening the grey. Yes. And that's something which I'll probably encompass in the item that I've got on the forward plan in relation to sort of green corridors. So it's kind of very much in line with that. Just a bit of feedback there. Okay, thank you very much. So that just leaves me to ask you to note or comment on the forward programme. I don't think we got...
Councillor Hooman.
Yes, Councillor Brockway.
Thank you. I think that we should have an agenda item discussion on the level of fines, traffic parking fines, and yellow box junctions and cameras and so on and so forth. It's a huge income stream for the council, which has only recently been published. I think we ought to have the bus lane fines and everything like that. We need to know how much income the council is getting.
Councillor Vaughan, is that something that comes under your Policy and Accountability Committee? Public realm? Okay, But thank you for the suggestion, but we will definitely take it away, look into it. I like, it may well be more appropriate for the pack, but yeah.
Well, it hasn't been scrutinised.
Okay.
And I think it's an overview, given the size. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
noted. Thank you. Any other comments on the forward programme? No. Could I thank everybody for coming along this evening? I think we're all going to go off with AI in our heads now, as much as we can. And cost of living, yes. Okay, thank you very much. And the next meeting is on the 1st of July, I believe. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.